who's going to be leading out the evening. We're going to give a couple minutes for people to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started with interpretation and the presentation and Q&A. Thank you. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome to the D5 Town Hall on one-time COVID funds with Director Hutchinson. And we're going to allow one more minute for guests to join us, and then we'll get started with interpretation instructions, and then we'll pass to Director Hutchinson. Thank you for being right on time. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Welcome. Thank you. I see a few more folks joining tonight. Thank you for attending the D5 Town Hall on one-time COVID funds with Director Hutchinson. I'm going to get started by giving instructions for interpretation in case any of you need interpretation, and then I'll pass it to Director Hutchinson for the agenda for the evening. So first we'll go ahead and give instructions in Spanish. So Andres, if you want to do that, and if you need instructions in Spanish, he'll tell you how to ask for that so we know. Go ahead, Andres.
Okay, thank you. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Andrés, voy a dar las instrucciones en español. Las personas que necesiten traducción al español, ahorita lo que ven en su pantalla, ven el círculo donde dice Interpretation, eso lo van a ver en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Cuando le dan clic y buscan español. No lo van a ver ahorita, lo van a ver hasta que se acaben de dar las instrucciones en los diferentes idiomas que lo van a hacer, entonces van a ver eso, no lo ven ahorita. Las personas que están en un celular, hay 3 puntitos en la pantalla de su celular, busquen esos 3 puntos, presionen y sigan las mismas instrucciones. Se recomienda que le bajen el volumen original para que no interfiera con la interpretación en español. Cuando empiece a traducir, por favor, si una persona me escucha, me puede poner en el chat que me está escuchando, o si ahorita alguien necesita interpretación en español, por favor, levante su mano para saber que hay personas que necesitan interpretación al español. Gracias. Okay, Mr. Quinton, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Andres. And for those who just joined, welcome. We're just getting started with interpretation instructions, and then we'll move forward with the D5 Town Hall with Director Hutchinson. Carmen, can you give instructions in Hmong, please?
Aló, buenas tardes. Chon te chimo chuli hal enton hashkoma tsote junto lo tokiol mam. Achachi ton tok chavi any tokiol mam ka chik hash tal khuzum ha tok interpretation te tsok mas chik hash foot pantai telo ha tok concert chak hat tsok okot pe ite mat chik hash ni ka yo te tsok mam okot pe iton se tok in ka tokiol mam hash mat ok shi to junte telaf na hash at o shpunt ka chik hash te tsok o shpunt chokot pe ton se chik hash interpretation ha to interpretation كوكبير إن غاشي هاشني كهيون أكبير اللي تمام تنستقبين قد كهيون هال خاخ ني خكوتي أك أحوال تنتكوش ني تشيج بريغون تنتون حتى كل شيء أنشي برهاش قاخت أكبتشي أن نسيت كتشي تنتكبين تقيون مم أتخو أنتون تنستقبير تنتكبتشي كأتخال كوكبين تقيون مم شخون تشي وين. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to the guests who are with us. We're just going through a few more languages in case anybody needs interpretation. Alex, can you give instructions in Mandarin, please?
如果你是要国语，就是普通话的翻译功能开机之后，你等一下可以到上面的地球标志，你点击之后，你可以选择 Mandarin， 这样的话也可以听到这个中传翻译，也有选项可以关掉这个背景声音。如果你在使用手机，你可以点击上面的3个点子，然后之后你可以选择这个翻译功能。如果你在用谷歌电脑笔记本，遗憾的是这个功能不能使用，所以请你用其他的电脑。Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. And let's keep going here. Can we have Angel, can you give instructions in Cantonese, please?
各位歐倫社區人士好，呢度係歐倫聯合校區疫情撥款第5區峰會。假如你需要廣東話翻譯，請你熒屏嘅右下方點擊一個地球形狀嘅符號，然後選擇中文，咁你就會聽到我哋嘅廣東話翻譯。假如你需要廣東話翻譯，請你熒屏上邊舉手，等我哋知道。多謝。I'm finished, Miss Tuckington.
Thank you. And Miriam in Arabic?
مساء الخير جميعا، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الاستماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية الرجاء اتباع التعليمات والإرشادات. في أسفل الشاشة هناك خاصية على شكل الكرة الأرضية، اضغط عليها ثم اضغط على كلمة الترجمة ثم اختار اللغة العربية. إذا تستخدم جهازك النقال بإمكانك أن تجد هناك أسفل الشاشة هناك 3 نقاط عند كلمة interpretation، اضغط عليها اختار اللغة العربية. الرجاء كتم الصوت الأصلي حتى تتمكن الاستماع علينا بطريقة واضحة، وإذا هناك أي أسئلة بإمكانكم المشاركة هناك في الصندوق الترجمة. شكرا إليكم. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Vin Kim for Vietnamese.
Kính chào quý vị, tôi tên là Vinh Kim Vũ, tôi là thông dịch viên tiếng Việt cho quý vị. Ngày hôm nay vào trong cái buổi họp mà quỹ tài trợ một lần Covid sẽ được dùng ra sao, thì quý vị đừng thay đổi những cái chế độ gì cho đến khi xong phần mà giới thiệu về những ngôn ngữ, thì quý vị sẽ thấy về phía dưới sẽ có một cái quả cầu hiện lên. Cái quả cầu mà nó có cái chữ là interpretation, thì quý vị nhấn vào đó và chọn cái kênh tiếng Việt. Nếu quý vị là dùng phone thì không có thấy được cái quả cầu mà thấy có 3 dấu chấm, thì quý vị nhấn vào 3 dấu chấm đó và chọn cái ngôn ngữ và cái phần mà cũng là interpretation, thì quý vị nhấn vào đó và chọn cái ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt. Sau đó thì quý vị nhớ tắt cái âm thanh chính của mình để mà mình có thể nghe được người thuyết trình viên nói chuyện. Nếu quý vị có thắc mắc gì xin giơ tay lên để chúng tôi sẽ hướng dẫn tiếp tục. Cảm ơn quý vị. I finish.
Great, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and click start. Okay, so welcome everybody to the D5 Town Hall with Director Hutchinson on one-time COVID funds. I'm going to give a brief overview of the agenda and then pass it to Director Hutchinson to lead us through the presentation and the Q&A this evening. So you'll hear an overview of the funds from Director Hutchinson. Then we're going to have a Q&A time. You can go ahead and write any questions you may have in the Q&A. We have the chat shut off, but we have the Q&A button open so that we can record your questions. We're not going to have any staff write in answers during the presentation so that we can focus and so that all questions are actually recorded live. So, but we will capture your in the notes in the Q&A. So please use that to write out your questions. And then during the live Q&A section, Director Hutchinson will take your questions. And then we'll move into a section where Dr. Hutchinson is going to ask for your feedback on investments. And we have a way for you to fill that out as well, which we'll get to later in the meeting. So that's the flow of the evening. And with that, I will pass it to Director Hutchinson for a welcome and any other comments on the evening. And we'll move forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. And so I don't forget to do it later. Thank you, Jody Talkington and the rest of the staff for really helping put together this presentation and kind of set up tonight. It looks like we're probably going to have a fairly small crowd here attending the meeting, which allows us a more intimate setting. So I don't think that's a problem at all. And then the plan is we're recording this and I will blast around the recording later to really help inform as much of the community as possible. If you look in the chat, there is a link to both the presentation I'm going to go through and a Google form. After we make this presentation, and I'm going to answer any technical questions about the budget, one of the things I really want to do is start capturing ideas that the community has for how we can use $100 million that we have left in our COVID relief dollars over the next 2 to 3 years. And so not only is there a link to the Google form, please feel free to share that form with other folks in the community. And we're really trying to solicit as many responses as we can get to help inform how we're going to make these decisions going forward and how we really want to use our funds. And so again, I'm going to go through just the overall budget real quickly, talk about what we are calling our COVID relief dollars, answer any questions about that, and then we'll go into the listening session component. The meeting tonight is scheduled for an hour and a half. Hopefully we can maybe speed this up and be out of here sooner, but there will be plenty of time for questions and to listen to feedback at the end of this meeting. So I think without any other questions or further ado, I think we're ready to start here, Jody, with the presentation. Great. And if we can go ahead to the next slide. Great. And again, there is a link to this presentation in the chat. So what we have here are OUSD's official budget numbers over the last 7 years. And when I say official budget numbers, these are the numbers that come from what we call the closing of the books, the unaudited actuals that the district turns into the state a few months after the school year ends. And so these are the official numbers that if you checked on the state website, they would also have these numbers. And you can go through and read and pull these numbers from any yearly budget that the district has produced. And so on the left-hand side is what all of the numbers represent. And these are, again, the numbers for the general fund, which is restricted and unrestricted dollars combined. And this is most of the money that we budget, but this does not include everything. So for example, this does not include money from our facilities bonds that we might spend. And this also does not include what we're calling COVID relief dollars. So this is before we talk about COVID relief dollars. And we see on the left-hand side, what I've done is I've pulled from the pages of budget reports, I've pulled what I consider the top line numbers to pay attention to. And so the first one is total revenue, restricted and unrestricted. And this represents most of the money that we've received from the state and the federal government. Expenditures is how much we spend out of that. And then we have a net at the end of each year, either a surplus or deficit from our yearly budget. When you look underneath that, each school year, we start off with a certain amount of money in our fund balance, basically in our accounts already. We add in what the net from a year. In this case, for 14-15, the net surplus was $3,786,804. We add that to the beginning fund balance, and that gives us the ending fund balance, or the money that the district had on hand at the end of the school year. Then that ending fund balance is made up of restricted dollars and unrestricted dollars. Restricted dollars are funding that we receive that has to be spent on specific items. Unrestricted dollars, we have the freedom to spend those dollars however we would like. And without going into that too much, when we look at the fund balance at the end, we again divide it into restricted and unrestricted dollars. So we have money left over every year. Our restricted fund balance carries over to the next year. Our unrestricted fund balance also carries over to the next year, but it is our unrestricted ending fund balance that we consider our reserve. Sometimes the full name is the Reserve for Economic Uncertainty. So when we talk about how much money we have in our reserves, this is the money that we're talking about. And then lastly, the amount of money we have in our reserve can be turned into a percentage. And we do that by taking our reserve, our unrestricted fund balance, and dividing that by our total revenue in that year. And that gives us a percentage. And the reason why this is important is state law requires that we maintain 2% in our reserves. And for OUSD, since we are still under state oversight because we're still paying off our loan, if we fall below 2%, we can automatically be sent back into full receivership. So I'm sorry, my screen just went crazy here on my on my laptop. There we go. So that takes us through these key numbers. Then when we look year through year, so for the last 7 years, if we look at the net from each year, we see that 5 of those 7 years, we had a surplus from our 1-year budget. We actually added to our fund balance because we did not spend all of the money that we received for our general fund. And in 2 of these years, in 2016-17 and in 2019-20, were the 2 years that we had a budget deficit for those 1 year. The other thing that I think it's important to track is when we look at our ending fund balance over time, the amount of money we had in our accounts at the end of each school year, we can see that generally speaking, we have greatly increased the amount of money that we have in our reserves that we end with our ending fund balance. So either with the ending fund balance total amount going up, or we can see the reserve percentage steadily climbing. So when we look at this, this is our overall budget numbers. We also have an approved budget for the school year that we are in now for 21-22. That's not listed here because we have an approved budget. We will go through this year with that projected approved budget, and it won't be until about this time next year that we close the books and we will know the official numbers for the year after we have spent it. The other thing that's important just to know with this timeline laid out here is it is in the spring coming up, in the spring of 2022, that we will begin deciding our budget for next school year, for the 22-23 year. So our official budget numbers are always going to be basically a year behind of where we are, because this is where we know for sure what has happened in that year. So hopefully that makes sense a little bit. I'm gonna go through a couple more, I think, slides, and then check for some quick questions to make sure this made sense. So can we switch to the next slide? So this is a piece of the closing of the books for this past school year. So the slide that I just showed you, those numbers were pulled from documents that look like this. And so this is an expanded form with a lot more numbers. And so if you look, the top box for A says revenues. And so that is the same total revenue number that I just showed before. But we have subcategories here where you can see where those revenues come from. The LCFF funding, which is state funding, and the other revenues. Same for expenditures underneath it. And then it gives you a net for each year. You can actually, if you read through these reports from the official numbers, you can actually go within these categories, again, one step deeper. So for those who really have questions and want to start going into the budget, it's called the SACS report. They are listed and they are public information. And this is what I always use for the source information for budget numbers, because these are the official budget numbers for the year. So I think we're ready to go to the next one, Jody. And again, this was the bottom page of this report. So this shows an expanded view of our ending fund balance and what goes into what we call the reserves or the ending fund balance. And so the reason I like to keep that first document I showed, which is the yearly totals, it's a lot easier to track these high level numbers. But to get the full picture, you really have to start looking in some of these subcategories and even deeper than this to really track what's happening with the budget. Okay, I think we're ready for the next one, which will bring us to COVID funds. So I just want to stop because I can't see everything at the same time. So there are no questions yet. So I assume that everyone is okay with what I just presented, and I'm going to move into the COVID funds. But if you had a question.
Director Hutchinson?
Yes.
There is one attendee with their hand raised. If you want to take that now, or we can pause after the COVID fund part.
Sure. Why don't we take it right now, and hopefully they'll be understanding if once I hear the question, I suggest we wait 5 minutes.
Oh, the hand just went down.
Oh,
so I think they've changed their minds. So you can keep
then we're okay. So what I just laid out is our yearly budget. That is our normal budget process. But now what's happened during the pandemic is we have been receiving one-time dollars from both the state and federal government. This has not been part of our normal budget process, and these are not a part of our normal funding. These are one-time dollars, and most of these have specifically come about to fund COVID relief or to help fund the district through the pandemic. And so if we can switch to the next slide, Jody, perfect. So what has happened over roughly the last 2 years during the pandemic is OUSD has received or is receiving a series of one-time dollars from the state or federal government. This is the complete list of all the different funds and decisions that Sacramento and DC have made to give us extra money here in OUSD. We are, when we talk about it, we're kind of lumping all of these dollars together. And we are calling these our COVID relief dollars. And together, they all add up to $283 million. But as you can see, these are from roughly a dozen different sources. Each one of them has a little bit of different requirement, and each one has a different timeline for when we are required to budget and spend these dollars. We have already started spending these dollars, but we also have dollars left to budget and spend. And so if we can switch to the next slide, I think it's the one, hopefully, yes. So as these one-time dollars started to come in, the school board made decisions to start using these dollars. So $65 million from these COVID relief dollars were budgeted and spent during the 2021 school year, last school year. So these were dollars that we used when we reopened in the spring of the school year to help us get ready. These are the dollars that we used for PPE and supplies. These were the dollars that we used to help us convert to virtual learning. So in that first school year, full school year of the pandemic in 2021, we spent $65 million out of our COVID relief dollars. And so as you can see at the bottom of this page where it says, at the top, it says 2021 data. If you look all the way at the bottom, it has spent 2021, I'm sorry, 65.3 million, remaining to be spent 217.8 million. And that's because we started with the 283 million. So if we can switch on to the next page, Jody. So this year, and I'm going to go over this a little bit quickly. This year, we are also using these COVID relief dollars for a variety of things. And in full disclosure, right now, there is still there's still a lot of confusion and still even some dispute about how much is being budgeted to be used this year. And this is something that is going to take us the next few months to kind of work out. And these numbers that are very big right now will probably be coming down a little bit for a variety of reasons. But right now, these $100 million and then an additional 11.6 million is being budgeted for this school year. And so you can see at the bottom of this page where it says revised 100.7 million. So we are now creating a working total where that 100.7 million is subtracted from the 217.8 to leave us roughly 117, or if we take another 11 million out, roughly $100 million. And so if we can switch to the next page, I think, great. So this is here where hopefully we will be focusing more today and going forward. This just is kind of a sketch of how these COVID relief dollars have been used and budgeted so far. And so at the top, again, we started out with 283.1 million in COVID relief dollars. We spent 65.3 million in the 2021 school year, last year. This year, to date, we are budgeted to spend, if you add those two numbers together, 112.3 million, which leaves us 105.5 million left. That is where we stand right now, and this is where we have decisions that we need to make. As you can see at the bottom of this page, the language is planned 93.9 million for 2022 through 2024. That is what we still need to decide further. And there are multiple options for what we can do. And there are decisions that are starting to be made now, but we are really just at the beginning of this process. And just to take a half step back, as a school board director coming into office, being sworn in January, one of the top issues that I really wanted to address when I joined the school board was the financial mismanagement that we've seen over time in OUSD. And so this is a beginning of that process also. So we are in a very confusing time, but it's a good story. And so it's confusing because we are trying to change the way we do business in OUSD and change the way we approve budgets and include more community voice, while we also have to make a lot of decisions about all of these one-time dollars that are coming in at times that are outside of our normal budget process. And so there's just lots of things that are moving right now. But what we know for sure is we have 105.5 million left in our COVID relief dollars that we can budget and use for the future. This is on top of what we receive in our yearly budget. And so these are dollars that we can make separate decisions about and have to make separate decisions about than our normal budget process. And before I pause for questions, here's just one other level to it. We are trying to plan how we're going to be using these dollars, but our full budget process will be in the springtime. And so really, at the end of this school year, when we get to June, it is really going to be a combination of using these COVID relief dollars and our normal budget and kind of putting them together at the end of the year, where we will be able to see the full scope of what the plan is for next year, what we're able to fund, and kind of the entire budget. And so it has added an extra level of complexity. But I want to make sure that people understand how to read our budget numbers, understand how much money we have left from the COVID relief. And then what we're going to go to next is hopefully people having an opportunity to start talking about how they would like these dollars to be used. And so before we go to the next part, I definitely want to pause and see if there's any questions specifically about what we just presented there, the numbers, what's happened. Oh, and last thing, I'm sorry, I knew I was forgetting something. We also have a timeline coming up for some of these decisions. So there is going to be a vote at the October 27th school board meeting on an ESSER 3 plan. If you, on one of those pages, when we had the whole list of all of the COVID relief dollars, at the very bottom, the last ones coming in were the ESSER 3. And so we need to approve an ESSER 3 plan. But what the school board is going to be approving on the 27th is going to be kind of like a guideline. The school board can amend what they vote on. And also, this is the part that's difficult. Whatever we vote in this plan here, we are going to accommodate that when we do our full budget. And so these are, it's going to feel like these are permanent decisions that are being made on the 27th, but there really is still a lot of flexibility going forward. And I want to be very clear that we have flexibility to make decisions about this 100 million that we have left. And there may be flexibility to make decisions about more than that. But we know we do have this flexibility over this 100 million, but there is going to be a vote at the end of this month. And these are the things that we are trying to change. And so it's why we didn't have the greatest turnout for today, because I had to schedule this meeting kind of last minute, because I really wanted to make sure that at least we had the opportunity to explain the information and have a conversation before the vote on the 27th. So that's kind of the fuller picture of what's happening and the timeline. And I think if we could have some questions here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'll support you with that, Director Hutchinson. We have those who have put in the Q&A. I'll kind of toggle back and forth for those who have their hand up and those who are putting some in the Q&A. So let's start with one in the.
I see the first one. So we have a question. I got it here in front of me. So
do you mind reading it out too, just for those who can't see?
So we have a question. The funds which are shown as left still in this are shown as left still in this. So I think what the question is, the way I interpret this question is there's a question about what is left in the funds that we're showing, and a question about what's been allocated versus what's left. And please ask again if I'm misinterpreting your question. But I know that this has been an issue where we use different words interchangeably. We talk about budgeted, sometimes we say allocated, sometimes we say planned. So this is how I understand it and how I explain it to people. 65 million of our COVID relief dollars were spent in the 2021 school year. Those dollars were budgeted, or those dollars were allocated, budgeted, and spent. We have $112.3 million that has been allocated and budgeted for our current school year. Then there is 105.5 million left for the future. Now, there is no real term for allocated. And so that's where this has been pulled back. So that's where we are right now. The next step will be a plan to budget that will need to be approved by the school board for these $105 million. So the part that is in conflict is too strong of a word. The part that we don't know about, I'll go back. I was trying not to use buckets today, but I'll go back to the bucket analogy. The bucket that is unclear is the 112.3 million that has been budgeted for this current school year, because we're still in this current school year. So of that, to date, about 35 million has been spent. But that number keeps going up every day as we spend more of the dollars that have been budgeted there. So hopefully that explains the difference. If not, please ask again. Oh, and now I lost my Q&A page. Okay, so the next question I see, when decisions have been made, they are vague to us. And I'm just gonna, Okay, and when things have been approved, like mental health supports, there's a question about getting more clarity about what that actually is, what's been set aside. And I think, and the way I'm interpreting this question, again, I agree, is we haven't had a lot of transparency in the past. And so this is one of the things that is a work in progress. And so there is a dashboard for COVID relief funding. I'm sorry, Jody, I'm not sure if there's a link in the presentation to the COVID spending.
Yes, there is. And so I was just getting ready. It's in the presentation and I'll put it in the chat too. It has more detail on the investments.
Yes. And so I agree with this. There's a lot of confusion from a couple of sides. So there'll be a link in the chat. There is a COVID spending dashboard, which traces the individual spending to a category. And we've kind of looped things together by category in the COVID relief dollars. I don't think that fully answers the question as I hear it. And those are the things that we are working on, bringing more transparency and clarity. And again, this is what we have to work on. So for me as a school board director, one of the questions that that started to be asked in the Budget and Finance Committee and also by Director Williams is trying to ask those questions and connect these spending priorities and what we budget to actual spending, and then hopefully also tracking to make sure that those services were provided and we're getting bang for our buck. And so it is very confusing right now. And I think it's a work in progress. And I just want to say these were coming into the school board. These were things I knew would have to be kind of created. I am encouraged by how accommodating staff has been so far and really trying to push in this direction. The other thing that I don't want to gloss over that I saw in that question, and it's gonna have to be saved for another time because it would sidetrack this whole conversation. We do also need to have more clarity in our budget approval process and how the LCAP interacts with the school board approving the budget. So according to the board bylaws, when it comes down, the buck stops at the school board in terms of fiduciary responsibility, and the school board needs to approve the budget and spending. But there are components that the LCAP is in charge of, especially after LCFF funding was created. And so in my opinion, how those two interact needs to be worked on and resolved better. And so that's the best answer I have to that right now. But those are the things that hopefully, as we start to have more conversations and we start to get in the real budget approval process for this year, we can really start building some of these structures in and also have further conversations, because I think that would be a really good topic for a community conversation, not just how LCAP interplays with this, but the other thing that I've left out in all of this is decisions that are made by school sites and the school site councils. So I'm sorry if that was a semi-inadequate answer, but I agree. So the next question I see here, how can we support as an individual group one of your main goals to start the I'm sorry, I'm trying to read and talk out loud at the same time. So we're going to be getting a little bit into how we can support. What I'm really asking for today is for people to pass this information, whatever you gain from here, to pass this information on to other folks you know in the community. And what I really need now is for folks to fill out the Google forms and really start making your voices heard for how you think these dollars should be spent. And then as we go into this process, there will be further engagements, and hopefully we can get to the point where we're meeting like this in person and regularly, and this becomes part of the culture for how we make budget decisions. Okay, next question. Are there unfunded pension liabilities that need to come out of these funds? Who decides which school sites the funds go to? So when we are talking about our COVID, so again, good question. I think we need to keep in mind that when we are talking about COVID relief dollars now, which is separate from the general fund and the normal budget conversation. So I would say, I mean, personally and politically, I don't believe that we should use COVID relief funds to look at unfunded pension liabilities. And I would need to check with our senior business officer if it fits under one of the categories where we could use it on. But that is a question for when we get to our regular budget process and we're looking at our yearly budget. But one of the things that I am working on, and I would like to see we use some of the COVID relief funds for, is to finish paying off our state loan early. And there is a way to do that. So these are the things though, and I don't want to put limits on it. If you think that we should use these COVID relief dollars to make sure we're taking care of unfunded pension liabilities, then please weigh in on that so we know and so we hear that. Okay, next one I see, is there a general sense of how the remaining 100+ million will be used or how? So this is what we are asking now. I am asking you, how do we want to use the remaining 100 million? The question before asked even about how it was going to be distributed to school sites. These are the things that we do have flexibility about. So if we decide we want to use the 100 million to put back to our school sites, do we do that as a flat number where we raise per pupil spending an equal number at every school? Do we put an equity formula on that? Do we target certain schools for these added resources? I think those are the things that we need to look at. Are we talking about putting all of our money to the school sites, or do we want to use some of it for different things? So those are the things that hopefully this conversation is the start of us discussing. Can you explain what the categories in the previous slide, what degree the money left can be allocated for? Okay, categories on the previous slide. I'm not sure which categories on the previous slide.
You can go ahead, Karen. I do see, and you're saying, Maria, that your hand is up too. So would you like to take that question live, Director Hutchinson?
Please,
Okay.
please, and yes.
Okay, so
Jody, just please help me keep an eye on the time so
Yep.
we keep it moving. Yes.
I will do that. Okay, so Karen, I know you said, Maria, go ahead. You can ask your question. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm sorry. Just a quick question. You had a slide that had EFF and all these other things on it, and I wanted to understand what those categories were. I think it's after this one.
And I'm sorry,
A
was
little
it
bit more detail? Yes, this one.
okay, got you. Thank you. So what this slide is this is a list of all the different kinds of one-time dollars we've received over the last 2 years. And together,
right, but what are those, each of those resources, like, you know, there's just a whole bunch of acronyms, like what does GEAR mean? What does ESS mean?
Okay, so I would actually need to have staff come. So ESSER, the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 are the federal spendings. And each one of these stands for a different thing. So I could have staff come on and go through it, or we can find a different slide, but it's why I tried to move it quickly. What this is this is the list of all the things that we are collectively calling COVID relief dollars. These all represent one-time dollars that we've received that is separate from our normal budget process. So this is where the 100 million that we have left, this is where it's coming from. And technically, these are listed here going down the page in chronological order, basically. And so that's why when we get to the bottom where we see ESSER 3 and ESSER 3 for learning loss, that's kind of the money that we have left that we're discussing, roughly speaking. I don't know if that, and if you really want to go into it more, and this is really deep in the budget, the resource number is then tied to certain spending, and it's a way for us to track spending back to this funding source.
Thank you, Director Hutchinson. And also, we do have a couple folks from our fiscal office, CBO Lisa Grant Dawson, and Director of Strategic Projects from the fiscal team, Troy Christmas, if you want them to say more about each of the funds.
I don't think we need to go through it all, but if one of them wanted to add something to my explanation or didn't think I covered it, I could definitely.
It looks like we have Johanna Hoffman typing some in the chat, so she can follow up that way if you want to go to the next question. Okay.
I'm sorry, I lost where I was. How can
the only reason I ask is because I want to know that whether or not how we choose to go forward with funds, do we need to specify in which of those categories they should be spent? Or, yeah.
Got you. So thank you for jumping in and clarifying that. So one of the things is right now for what we are talking about, that is not the concern. And for these ESSER $3, I think we're up to 16 different categories these dollars can be technically used for. And it really is a pretty wide, we do have a lot of discretion for how we can use these dollars. And so I would say right now, as we are thinking about it, I would ask folks to not even limit their thinking or worry about that. I think we're really at the first stage of this conversation. I want to hear, and we will be passing on what people think. Then at the next phase, we can start to weed out what's actually possible and what's not. Because I think one of the things we really need to do as a community is we need to start having a different way to think about this. And we are not in the days of cutting and closures anymore. And so as we start to go forward, we need to start having this conversation of how do we reprioritize our budget? How do we better use our resources to fund our needs? And so that's where I'd like to keep it focused on. And we have a lot of freedom to these dollars. How can the community work to amplify community votes today? And so we are working, so this is my effort to start working on transparency and to start lifting up community voices. For me as a school board member, I'm on the Budget and Finance Committee. And even though I was sworn in January, I am just starting now my first year of going through a full year of the budget process. So I am encouraged that this is the first step of us having ongoing community conversations to make sure we are lifting up the community's voice. For me, the first step is to make sure we're going to solicit what people want and capture that and listen to that. The next step will be building off that conversation and hopefully putting this together and maybe even having some added committees or working groups to really fully flesh out these conversations. The other thing that's really important that people understand is this is not the only place for this conversation to happen. It is really important that folks start having these conversations at your school sites also. So hopefully this is spreading the information and empowering school sites to have these conversations to lift up community voices at each school site also. Okay, I'm gonna try to go through this because then we have our listening session and I want people to talk and I feel like I'm talking too much here. So does high schools have a hard time hiring culture keepers, perhaps a very low pay rate? Is there something that COVID relief funds could be used to support increasing pay rates? So yes. So one of the things, if folks think that we should be using COVID relief funds either to hiring more staff, making these jobs more attractive, and bettering the conditions of our staff, it is okay now to even say raising the pay of our staff. Please put that down. There will be a certain point as we're really looking at what we want to do where some of these things might not fit into this category of dollars. But right now, this is what I want people thinking. I think all of these ideas are needed, and this is the kind of information hopefully we can continue to lift up. So yes, it could be, and please make sure to give us that feedback. Thank you for the info. I want to share my experience year after year on PSAC is being told the LCAP can be amended. in response to parents feeling like the process is too fast and that we need more info from school sites. How will this be different? Well, it won't be all the way different yet. This is the best I can say is this is my effort to start us doing things differently. And, you know, I don't want to gloss over the fact of how contentious these budget issues have been for OUSD for 20 years. And so we will not be able to fix everything by having one town hall or even through one cycle. So this is hopefully the start of this. We need to bring real clarity and transparency to our budget process. The community has to feel included in these decisions. These are our schools and our dollars. And so this is what we are working towards. So I want to turn that around a little bit. I need your help to make sure that we are moving in a different direction, to make sure that it is. And so I appreciate that folks are lifting these things up. I agree that these have been an issue and that hopefully we will start moving forward in this different direction. What will the process and parameters of amending the use of ESSER funds, pay off the state debt? How much do, okay, so I'm gonna answer these next couple of ones quickly. So ESSER funds, and actually any budget decision, can always be amended by the same way that the decision's made, which is by a majority vote of the school board. And so when we put in this plan for the ESSER 3 that we're going to be voting on the 27th, it does not mean that we are forced to only do what is said in that plan. We can always vote to amend it. And so that will always be the process. And, you know, we have, this year, just like last year, which is very different because we're in a pandemic and we have these extra funds coming in. And so in a lot of ways, the budget approval process has been even quicker and looser than it was in the past because of the pandemic and all of these dollars. And so hopefully things are going to be slowing down now. And that is why we have to vote at the end of this month. It's kind of a requirement of these funds that this plan needs to be submitted, but we will be having our full budget process and have the ability to either amend ESSER 3 plan directly or amend our budget plan to accommodate it. And then, yes, I don't have the exact number of the state debt right now, and I don't want to get too much into it, but right now we have 2 state loans. We are scheduled to pay off one of the state loans in January of 23. The other part of the state loan is scheduled to be paid off, if we do nothing, in June of 26. And of course, we can use our dollars and use either the COVID dollars or make budget adjustments to accelerate our loan payments to pay it off early. And it actually makes financial sense to do that if we can as well. So it looks like those were the questions that I saw there. I don't know, I think I answered most of it. If anyone had a burning technical question that I didn't cover, please raise your hand. And while you're doing that, I want to set up the Google form because I just see we're at almost an hour. So I want to make sure I get this in. So we have a link in the chat. I know it was at the top. I'm sure Jody will put it at some point to a Google form. And on this Google form, I am asking, how do you propose using $100 million in COVID relief? And I want people to put your ideas down. This is I tried to make the question as wide open and as neutral as I could to solicit responses of how folks feel like we should use these funds over the next 3 years. And it could be even a combination of things, whether it's raising per pupil spending, things I heard already today, raising staff pay. It might be something like deciding to make facilities changes or new HVAC units, or buying PPE, buying testing. It is really wide open. And I would really just like folks to think about going forward, what do you think would be the best use for these dollars that we have to decide? And then the second question, which is separate, is how do you suggest we adjust or reprioritize the OUSD budget? And I debated whether to put that question in because we're not quite there yet, but might as well start the conversation now. So this one about adjusting or reprioritizing the budget is more for when we get to budget season in the spring. And this would be where if you think that we should not spend as much on maybe consultants, this would be, you say, as an adjustment or to reprioritize, less money on consultants so we could use that money someplace else. And so it's two separate ideas though. The COVID relief funds are how could we use it? And the second question is when we look at what the OUSD budget has looked like over the last 5 years, how could we make changes within that budget? Please, I also ask for everyone's name and school site, and if you're a D5 resident. If you really don't want to, I'm sure you can find ways around answering those questions, but it just helps me to capture the information and hear where it's coming from. And also, this is hopefully the start of me doing a better job of communicating as a school board director. And I'm still trying to figure that part out. So with the time we had left, if people wanted to, I would really like to, if folks want to click on the Google form right now and start filling it out, that's great. If you want to take it and fill it out later, that's great. Please share it with your schools, share it with your networks. The more responses we get, the better. But I also wanted to see if we could do this on Zoom here to have a quick listening session with the time that we have left. And so if people wanted to, and if we're able to almost like what you would answer on the Google form, to give everyone a chance to say it in their own voice right here about how you would like the COVID relief dollars to be used over the next 3 years, this $100 million. Hopefully, folks will respect that there's other people on here, so we won't take all the time, each person, but I really want folks to start thinking about it. And I want people to also know that this is why I set this off, so I could specifically hear this from folks and give people a chance. In case I forget to say it later, please also feel free to send emails to myself and the other school board directors. And our next school board meeting is going to be on Wednesday, the 27th. Lastly, for this part, I'm also on the Budget and Finance Committee. And I'm sorry, I just can't remember off the top of my head when in November we decided to have our next meeting. But that's also a good place to come, especially for folks who are interested in the budget and these issues, because at the committee meeting, it's a little less formal and there's more time for more discussions and engagement. And so it's just a better place than the school board meetings themselves to have some of these conversations. So if people wanted to, and I'm trying to not lead people in a direction. If I need to, I could give a prompt, but I really want, I don't want to guide people to a certain answer for these COVID dollars. So if folks wanted to, in the time we have, if there's anyone who wants to raise their hand with the raise your hand feature, and we'll just go through and hopefully a minute, 2 minutes at the most, just kind of give your ideas or thoughts on how we could maybe use these COVID relief dollars. But please, also fill out the Google form, because I will have those. We're recording this, so I'll be able to capture it, but it's so much easier for me to capture it in those Google forms. So I think that's everything we need, and we'll just try to go through these. I'm gonna try to, unless there's a direct question, I'm gonna try to really not comment, because I really want this to be more of a listening session and me listening to folks. So do you want to go through
Sure.
the names there, Jody? Great, thank you.
Sure. First, we have Dr. Cesar Cruz. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Jody, thank you so much. And Director Hutchinson, thank you so much. I think what I wanted to share with my question, and I thank you for lifting it up, is that we see hundreds of millions of dollars already allocated for the COVID relief funds to things that are part of LCAP and what schools are working on. And we're hoping that that's wonderful. Because it's important to have clarity, what I think we would like to know is, what are the schools working on? What is exactly going to be funded? And a suggestion that I have, when we think about COVID relief funds, we think about a pandemic, and the first one is the physical safety. So making sure access to testing, the vaccine, all of that, right? But when we think about health issues, we want to think about the mental health of the children in the district. I have 3 kids in the district. One is at Oak Elementary, one is at UPA, and one is at Life Academy. And our kids being away for about 19 months has created so many issues for isolation, for sadness, for depression, for not being able to make friends. And it's been exacerbated by so many of our community members losing their jobs, and so it's kind of trickled down to kids and their mental health. And so really wanting to advocate in an emergency during a pandemic for COVID to really focus on the mental health of our children, because what we hear from science is that in order to have academic achievement, kids need to feel safe. Kids need to feel loved. Kids need to feel stable. It's part of what Maslow talks about, these hierarchy of needs. And so I really hope that we'll prioritize mental health school-wide. And the last thing is, you mentioned something really important, is that we need to look at this from an equitable standpoint, because historically we have always seen certain schools get more of the funding, and then other schools get the least amount, especially in our neighborhoods in DB Stokeland. And so I really hope that we'll prioritize things in an equitable way, and that mental health is finally at the center for kids in our community. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Karen. Should be able to mute yourself.
Sorry. I guess my biggest concern, or one of my questions is, can we allocate these funds across the district and then specifically identify site-specific funding? And how can that work? I mean, there are things that need to happen across the district. All schools need to have HVAC upgraded. All schools need to have something. And then each specific site needs to have either different teachers or different, needs based on bilingual or emphasis, etc. So is there a way to do that?
So there's a way to do anything. So I'm going to do Jeopardy here. I'm going to change the framing of that and make it that is what you are asking for us to do. And so yes, at least for me, everything is wide open right now. And so I agree with you. We need both, and it might be coming up with a formula to do both, where we raise spending across the board, but we also carve out some money to be targeted in a specific way.
Next speaker, Shula Bien.
Hey everyone, thank you for having this engagement, and I'm glad that you are asking the community for input on this. I am a District 5 resident and I work at a school site, and kids are getting really sick, and teachers are getting sick from COVID, and it's not showing up on the OUSD dashboard because there is less testing happening now than there was at the beginning of the school year. And if a student or a teacher does not test positive at school, then the numbers aren't reported in the same way. So every day I have anywhere from 5 to 10 students who are absent, who are on some kind of COVID protocol. If we want to keep schools open safely during the pandemic, we need to have we need to spend this money on things that are going to keep our school sites safe. We need to have PCR testing at every school site at least once a week. Kids are missing school because they need a negative PCR to come back to class, and they don't know where to get one because OUSD schools, there's only 10 of them that offer PCR tests. And a lot of those sites, like they're far away. And so it's difficult for families to figure out where they need to go in order to be able to come back to class. So we're having a lot of absences unnecessarily because families don't have testing access. We also need better ventilation in our cafeterias. It's supposed to start raining this week in a lot of schools. That means that there are very unsafe practices that are about to start in terms of eating lunch. I'm hearing about people going back into classrooms where students are going to be unmasked with limited ventilation. We need to have a plan, a safer plan for this. So I would also advocate that the money be used for better ventilation, HVAC ventilation, as you mentioned, in the cafeterias so that we have some kind of safe plan for students eating. And then the final thing that I wanted to lift up is that with all of the people getting sick, we have a huge staffing shortage. A lot of teachers are being asked to sub during their prep periods, and a lot of subs are not showing up to school sites. So it just causes a lot of stress on the whole community. And so I think the money should also be used for signing bonuses for people to join, to incentivize teachers and nurses to apply for jobs in OUSD. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks to everyone who's joined the call tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Dulce Fajardo.
Hello, good evening. I have 2 students in Manzanita Seed at the moment. My biggest concern right now is due to the rainy season, my kids not having the proper ventilation in the school, specifically in the cafeteria. You know, I was made aware to me that there's no HEPA filters in the cafeteria, and that's an issue. My kids already caught colds twice, and we're only 2 months in. You know, so that's a constant worry. So I'm thinking, you know, they already caught colds, they get sick, you know, they're children, they can't get vaccinated yet. So, you know, I'm just worried that they're gonna get sick. And that's not okay. You know, I might want them to keep attending, but I worry every day, and I worry more now that, you know, the rainy days are coming starting tomorrow. And this is something that I communicate with the teachers, and I really hope that the school board can support staff and students and think about the well-being and their health, and also be able to, you know, prioritize what the money can be spent on. And this is a priority. And I also agree with, you know, other folks that have said prioritize, distribute the money, you know, as needed, but really think about their health overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms. Shelley G.
Hi. Okay, let me walk away because I'm in another meeting. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey.
So D5, the D5 representative, SSC chair for Brewer. I'm in 2 meetings now, but let me come over here and speak to you guys. I was, wow. So I appreciate the town hall. I appreciate you and Jody doing this for us. We're discussing this in so many different platforms currently. We have our PSAC tomorrow, which is very important. I want to encourage everybody listening, including you guys, to come because we're doing SSC business, SSC discussion. And in terms of spending money, it looks like this is the same budget we're pulling from and discussing in different locations. So if parents, community leaders, administrators, central office, whomever is interested in participating in this, I encourage us to participate in this PSAC meeting tomorrow evening to have your voices heard, because on SSCs, the governing starts at our schools, at our sites. What Brewer would need X amount of dollars for, maybe we already have through PTA versus say Roosevelt, just throwing one out there. Our needs differ per site. So, you know, if Title I goes across the board, the same dollar amount, it's not necessarily used for the same reasons. So we have different school sites with different needs that need to be met, different HVAC system issues, different AC issues, different PPE issues. So there's quite a bit of money, being funneled to OUSD, but not in a clear and transparent understanding of how it's being spent. So where we can do it, we can't take on this big monster of a budget on one hand, but we can start at our sites with SSCs if we want to get involved in the governing and budgeting and support for our schools. So I don't necessarily have a question, but certainly an encouragement for us to start where we can. And if we can start at PSAC or in the PSAC meeting, or start at an SSC meeting, or start a PTA, then that money that is coming through, we can have access to that budget sheet. We can have access to those dollar amounts that are coming in and start asking questions. How come we don't have enough PPEs here? Or how come we don't have staff coverage here? But we have to be involved. So I encourage my fellow community members and parents and whomever else to be involved, be present, ask the right questions. We can't just fight with OUSD as a district, but we can certainly be proactive at our sites and expand from there. So I just want to encourage us to do that.
So thank you, Shelley, and I want to second that to everyone. Yes, we need folks to get engaged and get involved. And let me just say, I know it's confusing to me how many different bodies have these conversations and how they all interplay or overlap with each other. But I also know, as a school board director for District 5, there's certain things that I can be in control of, and I have certain responsibilities. So I want to make sure, in terms of representing District 5, that I am giving our district a chance to weigh in, that I will always collect what I hear from the community that I represent, and I will pass that on. And we're really trying to, I know that I can do that here in this space, where I might not be able to do that showing up at an LCAP meeting. And so this is really, hopefully, a distinct space for District 5. And so even with our limited outreach, and I will do a much better job next time, we heard tonight, Ms. Shelley talking about her involvement at Brewer. We heard multiple folks talking about SEED. This will start to be an opportunity in these regular meetings where everyone will be welcome, but we are going to be focused on District 5. That's what I was elected to do. And so I really appreciate this opening conversation. I really want to encourage, please fill out the Google form so I can capture that. That will help me pass it on to the district. That'll help me when I'm in other meetings saying, this is what my constituents who I represent are saying. And hopefully, my other goal, I can say it now that we're almost done, is, in my opinion, I haven't liked how the district has been gathering information over the last few years and doing surveys. This is my attempt to try to start doing engagement in a different way. I don't think we should be doing biased surveys. I think we should really be asking the community what they think and what they want. This meeting would have been in person, but we just didn't think that we could find a school site during the pandemic and make it happen in this short amount of time. I'm really determined for the next one that I do of these, that we will be in person, and then we can have a live stream of it also for people who can't attend. And so again, last chance for I'm not sure if Karen has her hand up for another thing, but I will go to that in a minute, but last chance for anyone else to speak on how you would like these dollars to be used, or something you forgot or didn't want to say from before, because I see all the hands. Oh, there goes. I'll give it one more minute and an arm twist here for a couple more comments in these last 15 minutes. I would love to let staff go early. But please, I cannot stress enough, I really want folks filling out these Google forms, sharing it around. If we need to make sure that we're creating them in other languages, I will make sure to get that done. So let me know if there's a problem with it. But this is my attempt to start not just listening to the community not just lifting up community voice, but really capturing it so we can push the community voice forward. And for the next one that I do of these, I'm also a member of the Journey for Justice National Alliance, and we are doing listening sessions nationally, and then we are turning those results all over to President Biden's administration. And so we're really trying to set up stuff where both locally we can really capture community voices and push it forward, but I'm also plugged in other places, both statewide and nationally, that hopefully we start to build up this culture of these ideas come from the community. When we lift up our voices collectively, we can find solutions for the problems that we're seeing. So I want to thank everyone. Oh, did that hand disappear?
Was Mona, do you still have a?
Okay, there we go. So I'm sorry, Mona. So I'll stop talking. So even though you're not raising your hand physically, you could have kept it up. But thank you, everyone. If there's anyone else who wants to comment on this last time, please put your hand up now. And then when we're done with these last couple of hands, we'll just call it a night. I can always be contacted at mike.hutchinson, HUTCHINSON @OUSD.org. We will have the video from this meeting, a link to the presentation, and a link to the Google form. I'm not sure where they're going to be posted, but if you have problems finding it, you can reach out to me and I can forward it. And then once I know where it's posted, I'll announce that every place also. And again, our next school board meeting is on October 27th. And so please participate. You can send e-comments, come and speak.
I have a, I want to, wait.
I'm sorry, go ahead now, Mona.
I'm sorry, was the meeting ending? I'm confused.
No, we are. So any ideas for how we should spend the $100 million we have left?
Okay. Hi, you all. Sorry, I'm multitasking and I'm supposed to be getting over to my son real quick, so I wasn't quite sure how this was going, but this is Mona. I am a parent and have had my children in D5, or my son in D5 schools, and also, but I do live in D6, and have been just watching all of this stuff for a long time, watching how the pandemic is going and it's impacting all of us, all of our kids, our families, our teachers, our schools. And one of the things that I'm not sure, that I was hoping we would have time to talk about in the PSAC and everywhere where these conversations are happening about how to use these funds is how to support our teachers and teacher retention. I'm really concerned about how kind of like the sentiment on sites of a sense of demoralization. There's a lot happening. Our teachers, and not only our teachers, but a lot of the staff at our school sites are holding a tremendous amount right now. And we do have, empty slots. We are short substitutes. We're also short teachers. And so in some cases, like in my son's school, sometimes classrooms are doubling up or tripling up. They're moving classrooms into the gym and things like that. And if that kind of scenario in the beginning of the school year is just really stressful, especially if you have different things happening where the protocols aren't totally fully functioning. Sometimes information is getting to our staff and sometimes it's not. And so I'm just really concerned about how we are taking care of school site staff and teachers. And we really would like to see a component of these COVID relief dollars being prioritized towards teacher retention strategies and a real conversation amongst our school sites, our leaders, school board members, and the PSAC, everywhere where these conversations are happening, that we can really start talking about how are we taking care of the staff at our school sites, and how are we making sure that folks aren't just quitting and walking off the job, which has been happening at school sites across the district and also across the country. So I really feel like that part of the conversation has not been very visible, and that is a major flag. We are going to see more losses in our really good educators, and we don't want that. So we need to include that in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And so since I see no more hands, we'll call it a night. I really want to thank everyone for attending and really being patient and the tone of the conversation. Again, this is just the start for us. And this gives me a lot to go from. Please share around those Google Forms. And again, I really want to thank staff for helping with this presentation, for being here tonight. I really appreciate the help and the support. And what I really want to see more than anything is we all are in this together. And these are the issues that we're all going to have to really collectively work to find solutions to. It has been a systemic problem in OUSD for at least 20 years, but we have this historic opportunity to figure out a new way working forward. And I really want to point out to the folks in the community who attended that this is what I'm working on to have more, where we really do have a united front between our political leadership, which the school board represents, and the district staff. And together, if we really work in alignment with the community, we have this huge opportunity to really bring about the transformational change that we want. So I'm determined not to let us squander this opportunity we have with these dollars. And I think today was a really good first conversation. So hopefully I'll be having another town hall of some sort in November. It's going to be really hard to follow up on all of the same subjects. So that's kind of to be determined, but we're going to try to start doing this regularly. The other thing I really want to say before we go is for those of you who are at District 5 schools, one of the things I have not done the best job since I've been on the school board is constituent services. It has been really hard, especially with the pandemic, for me to be at school sites like I plan on being. So if you are at a District 5 school, please reach out, let's talk, and let's set up a time for me to be on school site in the next 2 weeks so we can continue these conversations, like I heard somebody mention, kind of site by site, and I can really be there to answer questions and support us as we're going forward developing these plans and budgets. So unless there's anything else, I think that's good for tonight. And thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Jody, again, for all the help for putting this together.
All right, thank you.